Order, order. Toby Perkins to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey. It's a great pleasure to open the debate and to serve under your chairmanship. And I'm delighted that so many honourable members have come along to support the raising of awareness around this crucial issue. I'd also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for selecting this topic for debate under the auspices of that committee, and particularly to the Honourable Member for Southend West for his support in attaining the debate and support in promoting it too. I'd like to start by paying tribute to Adrienne and Leanne Lakin from Chesterfield, two of my constituents, and all of the fibromyalgia campaigners who bang the drum relentlessly to ensure that the voices of fibromyalgia sufferers are heard. Many of them are intending to come down to witness our debate today, and I know that their campaigning has been instrumental in persuading other honourable members to attend or to speak out on fibromyalgia. I was very proud to present the petition in Parliament, which had reached over 100,000 signatures on change.org, calling for fibromyalgia to be recognised as a disability and to call for greater awareness of and investment in the treatment of fibromyalgia. I recognise that the context of this debate spans the responsibilities of both the Department of Work and Pensions and the Department of Health, and hope that the Minister, in their response, will be able to pass on to their relevant counterpart those topics that are raised which do not directly fall under their purview. So, what is fibromyalgia? For those watching this debate who, like so many people in our country, are ignorant about a condition that so many people suffer from. Fibromyalgia is amongst a group of conditions often referred to as invisible illnesses, but the consequences of it are something that sufferers live with every day of their lives. Yeah, very happy.
I'm very grateful to my old friend for giving way and really do warmly congratulate him on securing this debate. And I think he was telling that he used the word invisible then, because isn't it the case that this isn't just about raising awareness, it's also trying to actually get to a stage where fibromyalgia is diagnosed far more easily than it is to?
Well, it's an excellent point, Mr. Bailey, and it's one I'll return to in a few moments. It's absolutely right that one of the major problems fibromyalgia sufferers experience is that it takes so long for their condition to be diagnosed, and I'll talk more about what more we can do to ensure that throughout general practice there is earlier diagnosis and better understanding. Fibromyalgia sufferers will experience many different kinds of symptoms, often a heightened sensitivity to pain and extreme muscle stiffness. They will also often struggle to sleep, which exacerbates, as we all know, the problems that they experience with the muscular difficulties and experience extreme fatigue. They also experience cognitive difficulties, not just headaches, but problems with mental processes, often known as fibro-fog, and the inability to process things in the way that they did prior to suffering with fibromyalgia. And often, as if that wasn't enough, fibromyalgia sufferers are struck down with irritable bowel syndrome too. So it is a panoply of symptoms that mean that sufferers have a really terrible time. But often these symptoms are, for the general practice purposes, masked as other conditions, and so they go through many time-consuming treatments that don't actually get to the root of the issue. I'll give way to my honourable friend from Sheffield first.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulating him on securing the debate. Sarah, who's a young mother in my constituency, has fibromyalgia, which was triggered by the birth of the youngest of her 3 children. She describes a pain so severe that she can't even hug her kids, but talks about a PIP assessment process that has stripped her of her dignity through a lack of understanding. So would he agree with her that it's unintentional ignorance and a lack of knowledge of what a debilitating illness fibromyalgia is that needs to be addressed?
Well, I mean, I absolutely would agree with my honourable friend, and it's incredibly powerful for him to bring the experiences of his constituent. And I think it is only when we meet people who suffer with fibromyalgia and even more so for those who live with people who suffer with fibromyalgia, that we really get to understand what it is like to walk a mile in their shoes. And I think one of the reasons why we've asked the DWP to respond to this debate is because it is a condition that, on the face of it, the people who suffer with it don't appear to be so ill. When we actually hear testimony like that, we understand what it really is like. So I'm going to give way to my honourable friend for a moment, and then to the lady.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I too, like other members here, have had constituents who've come to my advice surgery and complained that they've had fibromyalgia, but it hasn't been, quote, taken seriously. And all too often, it's not just GPs and clinicians, but also the Department of Work and Pensions, and indeed others in society who simply see this as aches and pains. And I think it's very, very important that, as he has done already, we develop the argument that this is far more than something which can be easily dismissed.
Well, again, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend, and it is, I think, the reason so many people are actually here today on such an important day in Parliament, when there's so many alternative demands on our time, is because we have actually experienced what our constituents have experienced, and that's incredibly powerful. Wait to the lady.
My friend for giving way, and does he agree with me that the fluctuating nature of the of fibromyalgia means that the DWP system is not sensitive enough to respond to the challenges that people face who experience fibromyalgia?
Yeah. But I absolutely do agree, and I think that it hits to a wider problem within the assessment regime, within our benefit system, which is that all fluctuating conditions, whether that be mental health, whether that be muscular problems along the lines of fibromyalgia, but any of these conditions that people experience and then find are better on some days, or conditions that are manageable if they take a huge amount of medication, enable them to actually get out of the house and quite often appear at a day of assessment when they're actually in a better condition than they would be on the majority of days, that the assessment regime finds it very difficult to deal with those kind of situations. Now, yeah, happily.
Way and congratulate him for securing this debate. My constituent Susan says that the pain that she suffers from this is so bad the only time she doesn't feel it is when she is asleep, and she mentions that it's not just that the condition isn't picked up of itself properly within the disability assessment, but that the impact of it on other conditions that she has where it can exacerbate them and make them even more extreme isn't being picked up. So does he agree that there is definitely a wider understanding of the effects of this illness within the disability system?
Well, I entirely agree with the honourable gentleman, and I think that it is that impact on the rest of the family, the caring responsibilities that then bestows upon those, and the extent to which that then restricts the ability of those other family members to develop their own earning potential, are additional added on consequences that mean the entire family of a fibromyalgia sufferer are sufferers too, and that's an incredibly powerful point. Now, estimates suggest that as many as 1 in 20 of us suffer from fibromyalgia. And since securing this debate, and as we've all heard already from the interventions that I've received, Mr Bailey, I've been contacted by many members of Parliament, by constituents and other members of the public to say at last someone is talking about a condition which I or my partner has suffered with for so long, and it felt like nobody understood. And the feeling of being misunderstood is one that is familiar to many fibromyalgia sufferers. Often employers will be baffled as to why an apparently healthy member of staff who on some days might appear to be the life and soul of the party, and on other days is appearing at work or unable to turn up for work because they are crippled by this condition. By the same perspective, those employees themselves will often feel tremendous guilt that a condition that so decimates their ability to contribute keeps striking them down. And this will often lead them to conclude that they must go into work, even though they're in extreme pain, and often make themselves even iller in the process. It truly is a vicious circle. Fibromyalgia sufferers are also misunderstood, as we've already heard, by those who assess them for benefits, such as PIP and ESA. as their conditions are variable and often able to be managed in the very short term. There are many fibromyalgia sufferers who've taken pills to help manage the pain and support them through an ESA assessment, only to discover that the assessment outcome bears little relationship to their own daily experience of living with fibromyalgia. I've had constituents speak to me about the fact that the tablets they took to enable them to get in a taxi, to get to their assessment, that enabled them to get through that assessment for an hour, then meant when they got home, they were in bed for days afterwards. And they, I think themselves thought, if only the assessor could see me now, half an hour after the assessment, they would see why I'm unable to work. But I've been able to get myself through that assessment for reasons of trying to comply with the system to my own disadvantage. I'll happily give way.
The honourable gentleman is making an extremely powerful speech. And as I will say, my contribution, my wife is actually a fibromyalgia sufferer. And isn't it not the case that stressful experiences actually exacerbate the condition, leads to these hugely damaging flare-ups?
Well, I mean, that's an absolutely spot-on point, and one given from the powerful perspective of someone who knows what it is like to live with someone who is experiencing this, is experiencing fibromyalgia. And I will come on in a moment to some of the other things that are believed to be triggers for fibromyalgia, but he's absolutely right. And I think that we all know that one of our worries about the assessment regime within benefits is that the whole stress of that process, whether it be the stress of going through the assessment, whether it be the stress of believing that benefits are going to be taken away, whether it be the stress of wondering how you're going to feel the next day, and the incredibly sort of unhelpful situation where your income is tied to you being ill. So you actually wake up almost hoping to be ill to justify the income, while simultaneously, of course, wishing you were better because you want to be able to contribute, is something that is known much more widely in our benefit system, but fibromyalgia sufferers are very, very familiar with. Yeah, happily.
Congratulate him on securing the debate, and can I also congratulate him on the awareness day that he hosted last year. It was very informative and a very moving day. But what I would like to say in relation to all the things that have been said about sufferers is, does he agree without the help of support groups like the one in Newcastle, people with fibromyalgia really wouldn't perhaps have any of their support outside to help them with benefit queries, managing their condition? And these are voluntary groups set up, and should we have more statutory groups to help people with this condition?
Well, I mean, I pay tribute to the voluntary group that she speaks of, and I think we all recognise the incredibly important role that voluntary groups of this sort play. And it's absolutely true that when you have a condition that is so misunderstood, speaking to other people who have experienced it, families that are supporting people who have experienced it, is incredibly important. And I think we're also all conscious that in an era where local government funding is cut, that often these charitable groups, these voluntary groups, are the ones that are seeing their funding cut. And these groups often don't require a lot of funding, but a small amount of core funding just enables the group to function. And so that is something that many of us are very concerned about. Now, I'm conscious there are a number of people that have put in to speak. I'm very happy to take those interventions, but also don't want to cut into other people's time. So I'll crack on a little bit, Mr. Bailey, and obviously if there are other pressing issues, then members are free to raise them. But it is hardly surprising that so many employers and assessment staff misunderstand fibromyalgia, when it is, as has been reflected already, so often misdiagnosed in the medical profession. Most fibromyalgia sufferers will live with a condition for over a year before it is diagnosed. And it is often the diagnosis of last resort, and means sufferers will often have gone through many painful months of ruling out various other explanations, taking other kinds of drugs that weren't actually relevant to their circumstances before the true cause of their pain is articulated. Yeah, happily.
The honourable member for giving way. And will he agree with my constituent Karen Mitchell, who has fibromyalgia, that actually medical help and support is very variable and varies greatly as to how well fibromyalgia is recognised, and that we need to ensure that there is consistent and helpful treatments available?
Well, I absolutely do, and the Honourable Lady will be pleased to know that I will be hot-footing it from this debate to health questions, where I actually have a question in about diagnosis of fibromyalgia in the general practice. And other members might wish to leap on the back of that and make their own contributions. And the one that she's just made is a powerful one, because I think when there is this variability of diagnosis, and I've met a number of the different sufferers who have had different kinds of treatment. As a result of the treatment that they've had, they are present very differently at this moment in time. So that is something that I've seen with my own. Let me just make a little more progress, and then I'll come back to my friend. Even today, with all the medical advancements that have been made, fibromyalgia is a condition without a known cause or a known cure. There are many factors thought to contribute to the condition: abnormal processing of pain due to chemical changes in the nervous system, imbalances in chemicals in the brain such as serotonin, dopamine and noradrenaline. The condition often appears to run in families, suggesting a genetic disposition to it. And as we've just heard from the Honourable Gentleman, stressful events can also be a trigger. There are many people who are concerned that general practice training, which by its very nature is general, is inadequate on fibromyalgia, and that this is a cause of the delayed diagnosis. Now, the petition also calls for greater research into fibromyalgia, with over 70,000 patients diagnosed having made claims for PIP. It is clear that this is a widespread problem, but that number is estimated to understate the number of fibromyalgia sufferers by at least 90%. My honourable
friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that it's absolutely vital that within each health economy that there is a clinical specialist in fibromyalgia, whether it's GP-led or specialist practitioner-led, in order to support people with fibromyalgia right through the pathway in accessing services, but also in management of their own healthcare?
Well, I absolutely recognise that, and I also recognise how stretched our National Health Service is more generally, and the need for us to have this specialist help as early as possible. And I think one of the things that's becoming clear is that the delay in diagnosis allows the condition to get worse, and it then adds to the costs of treating that further down the line. So anything that can be done to speed up the diagnosis will have many economic as well as medical benefits down the line. Now, whilst the suffering and economic cost of treating and supporting fibromyalgia sufferers is so large, and the knowledge base of what causes it and how to treat it is so small, this is an area that is ripe for further research. In the library note that we received before the debate, Mr. Bailey, we were told that in the last 5 years, funding applications for around £1.8 million worth of research were approved. Now, in a single year, and I appreciate why it's a false comparison, but I think it provides some context nonetheless. In a single year, the UK spends over £400 million on cancer research. I don't, of course, for a second underestimate the value of research into cancer, but given the problems that fibromyalgia causes and how long patients will live with it, surely we should be spending more than 0.5% of the investment into cancer research on researching this grave and widespread menace that is fibromyalgia. So what can we do to raise awareness of fibromyalgia? I think we will hear from the Honourable Gentleman on particularly that subject.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for bringing forward this debate. And as you can tell by the number of people that are here, many of us have been written to by our constituents. So I did a little bit of research, and it seems to me that the USA and Sweden both have good research teams in terms of looking at this condition and how it might help. Do you think the UK government should look at what Sweden and America are doing on this particular disease to see how we might be able to help out?
Well, I absolutely do, because Sweden and America are very different kinds of healthcare systems, but he's absolutely right to say these are two different healthcare systems that have world-leading research capabilities. Clearly, there is a big question in terms of future UK medical research around our leaving the European Union, where a great deal of medical research was much easier to do when you got 28 countries paying into it rather than just one. But whether we do it collectively with other countries or whether we do it individually, absolutely, we have world-class medical research capabilities in this country, and we should be contributing towards the global knowledge base on fibromyalgia, and he makes a very important point in saying that. So what can we do to raise awareness of fibromyalgia? Well, here in Parliament, today's debate is just the latest step towards doing just that. We've already had the presentation of the petition. The Fibro campaigners also held a reception at Portcullis House where around 25 MPs came along to hear more about what life is like living with fibromyalgia. I was delighted that Adrian Lakin and Billy Joe Mansell were able to present at that reception and actually get across to the members of Parliament present a little bit about the impact that it's had. Today's debate is another important step, and we look forward to hearing more about the government's strategy on recognising the effects that fibromyalgia has on its sufferers and what more they will do to raise awareness. But the petition was also specific about wishing to see fibromyalgia recognised as a disability under the Equalities Act. And I know that this is an important and contentious issue. Providers of public services are required to make accommodations for people with disabilities. Many fibromyalgia sufferers would qualify as disabled in their own right, but each sufferer has to prove their own disability, and given that it is a condition that we've already heard can take over a year to be diagnosed in the first place, it is often quite a bit after that before people who suffer with fibromyalgia are actually recognised as disabled. And whilst many people manage their symptoms and go on to enjoy productive lives, the invisibility of the condition and the difficulty of diagnosis means that many fibromyalgia patients are not recognised as disabled and are often invisible sufferers. And as we've already heard today, that then has a knock-on impact on their family as well, who are often attempting to manage caring responsibilities alongside trying to keep food on the table because of the responsibilities that they have as the breadwinner in the house. So fibromyalgia sufferers would like government and the Department of Work and Pensions to recognise that once diagnosed, fibromyalgia sufferers should be recognised as disabled under the purposes of the Equalities Act and ensure that those people get any support they need to lead productive lives. Of course, different patients will have different attributes and needs, but it is a chronic condition that will not get better, and so ensuring they don't have to fight to be taken seriously is of real value. We have heard previously that fibromyalgia may affect as many as 5% of the population, yet less than 0.2% of the population are people who receive PIP due to fibromyalgia. So, Mr. Bailey, I'm delighted to set the ball rolling on this important debate. Look forward to hearing the perspectives of other honourable members. Fibromyalgia sufferers need greater certainty, they need greater research, they need greater awareness, and collectively we as a country need to do more to ensure that we not only understand but support them in their illness and in their desire to lead productive lives.
The question is that this House has considered the recognition of fibromyalgia as a disability. Now, before I call the next speaker, can I make it quite clear that I am going to call the front bench spokespersons at 10:30. We have a lot of backbenchers wanting to contribute. I'm told at 10. So I am going to put an advisory time limit of 4 minutes at this stage, but I will probably drop it to a hard time limit if the earlier speakers take up an excessive amount of time. So on that note, can I call Sir David Ames?
I'm ready to congratulate the Honourable Member for Chesterfield on introducing this subject. Frankly, until he got interested, we hadn't spent too much time on it. Over the years, there's been battles to have voices heard about autism, dyslexia, ME, and it's taken the Honourable Member for Chesterfield to get so many colleagues here this morning. Now, we all know people who, when you ask them how they are, they actually go into great detail, they've got this wrong and that wrong with them. We call them hypochondriacs. And there is a great danger that people with fibromyalgia are somehow not recognised. It's a rotten illness, and for 2.1 million people to suffer from it, 1 in 20 people, and women are 7 times more likely to experience it. It is awful. So if I say to my honourable friend, the Minister, I think on a non-party basis, the honourable member for Chesterfield should be declared the fibromyalgia champion. He should lead and we should follow on this subject. Now he's started the ball rolling. I won't, Mr Bailey, repeat many of the things which the honourable member has said, but I absolutely agree with him about the importance of recognising fibromyalgia as a disability under the Equalities Act and understanding the debilitating and long-term effects that it can have on sufferers' lives. For those living with this painful chronic disease, lack of awareness leads not only to many to suffer in silence, but also often receiving inadequate support and treatment. Now, if I say to my honourable friend, the Minister, I found out what in Southend we're doing in terms of provision. Not brilliant, really. We have a chronic fatigue syndrome service across Essex and take referrals from GPs from other forms of fatigue, not just CFS or ME. There is not a single streamlined resource in the Southend area. However, all three teams, departments provide a service to fibromyalgia patients. This means that they have different routes to access services, but it's not really a niche service. And I'm sure that honourable members in the House this morning have similar experience. We've heard about the waiting time to get diagnosis. We've already heard about the lack of understanding of GPs. I think it's also important to ensure that patients themselves have a better understanding of the condition. As the honourable member for Chesterfield has said, unfortunately, we're struggling to find a cure and an understanding of how this happens. So I would, Mr. Bailey, like to highlight the vital importance of research in improving fibromyalgia patients' lives. There is still so much about the condition that is unknown. We do not even have a clear understanding of the cause. More critically, there is no known cure. So I believe that we should certainly invest in research. And with the right understanding, investment and attention, we can do more to ensure fibromyalgia gets the treatment it deserves. So, Mr. Bailey, I end with these thoughts. I have the highest regard for my honourable friend, the Minister. She's not going to perform any miracles today. She will agree with all colleagues who've spoken, but I'm getting a little frustrated about action. And that is what I'm really asking for. Now, the Health Secretary spoke about the 10-year plan, so if my honourable friend could perhaps say something in that regard and cheer us all up and say we are taking this illness seriously and we do have a plan on which we intend to deliver.
I think Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Under the Equality Act 2010, only cancer, HIV and multiple sclerosis are automatically recognised as disabilities, and for all other debilitating conditions, including visual and hearing impairments, motor neurone disease, epilepsy, dementia and cardiovascular disease, to be defined for the purposes of the Act as a disability, must be proved to be a physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on the ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And no doubt many campaigners for the conditions that I've just named, and there are many others, would also like these conditions to be automatically recognised as disabilities. But as the debate today is on fibromyalgia, I will concentrate on that. Now, before I was elected to this place, I worked as a clinical scientist for the NHS, and I was also a workplace rep for Unite the Union. And during my time as a union rep, I represented a colleague with fibromyalgia when the Pennine Acute Trust was formed in a merger of 4 separate hospitals: North Manchester, where we worked, the Royal Oldham Hospital, Bury General and Rochdale Infirmary. And inevitably, as happens in a merger of this kind, services were rationalised across the 4 sites, and the main pathology lab where we worked was relocated to the Royal Oldham Hospital. And my colleague had a great deal of difficulty with the relocation because of the extra travelling time and not working near to her home anymore. She was in constant pain and just about managing to hold down a job working close to home without the added stress and pain of travelling an extra 14 miles every day. Yet sadly, her manager was unsympathetic and seemed to have difficulty in recognising that she suffered from an extremely debilitating condition. No concessions at all were made for her condition, and she was forced to make the move, which caused her additional pain and stress. Yet had fibromyalgia been recognised as a disability, then the NHS as her employer would have been obliged by law under the Equality Act 2010 to have made reasonable adjustments to accommodate her condition and keep her in work, which could have involved working shorter hours, allowing for extra rest breaks, or even finding her alternative work on the North Manchester Hospital site so that she didn't have to travel. And her case emphasises why it is so important that fibromyalgia is recognised as a disability so that it becomes legally incumbent upon employers to make reasonable adjustments. And I know that she, sadly, is not alone. I've had at least one constituent who has had to leave her job because of the condition. Louise Ann Wilshaw contacted me last week and asked me to attend this debate. She told me that she'd had a very tough year, being off sick from work. Eventually, she had to resign from work because of the debilitating effects of the condition. At just 45 years old, she says that her future seems very bleak. She is uncertain if she will ever work again. She is also struggling with accepting and learning to cope with her illness and having to support herself financially. Illustrating the effects of her illness on memory and concentration, the fibro-fog that my honourable friend referred to earlier, she finished her email to me by apologising for any spelling mistakes she might have made. Many of those who have to leave work due to their experience of fibromyalgia often have trouble accessing the relevant benefits. Assessment for ESA and PIP does not depend upon the person being diagnosed as having a particular health condition or disability, but on how their health condition or disability affects what they can or cannot do, as determined by a work capability assessment or PIP assessment. We really do need to do more to support those affected by fibromyalgia, and for many, acknowledging their disability as a disability would be a great start.
Can I call Andrea Jenkins? You will have 4 minutes advisory. After this, I will be putting a 3-minute time limit on it. Andrea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I cannot remember a day without pain in over 15 years. When I first got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, it was less understood than it was today. So I do think we've gone on leaps and bounds. It felt like a very, I suppose, a condition really that was very much in your head 15 years ago, and it's a lot more widely understood today. So we are in the right direction, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Chesterfield for securing this debate, because it's important not only for raising awareness, but to ensure that we get more research in this area too. I thought I'd speak briefly, really, just about what it's like on a daily basis to live with this condition. And then I'll go on to talk a little bit about the current legislation and what I think could be done to help sufferers a lot more. The Honourable Member has already sort of discussed some of the symptoms. The widespread pain, that's probably one of the worst things. Waking up in the morning and being bent over in pain, feeling like you're 80 really, because every muscle in your whole body is just in pain. And that continues throughout the day. And what I found, the medication that they provide really zonks me out and gives me, and I have even more memory lapse with it, which in our profession is not really that good. You don't want to be able to sleep all the time. And I remember an occasion, it's a good job I kept my sense of humour about me actually. I remember an occasion back in 2015, newly elected, when I was speaking a guest on one of the political programmes. I get very nervous even to this day, like 3 years on from being elected, when I know I've got to speak in any debate or do any media, because you never know when the fibro-fog is going to come on. And I remember in this political programme, I couldn't think of a basic word such as economy. Now, I don't know about you, but what other word is there for economy that you can think of? And so I was there, the camera was on me, I just wanted the ground to open up, but I just sort of left it off and dealt with it. And another occasion, I was at a supermarket and loading everything up onto the till, and I completely forgot my PIN number. And, I had a whole week's worth of shopping and baby stuff on there. And the way I've dealt with it since is actually You know, in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you can phone a friend. Well, I now phone my mum when I have these memory lapses to remind me of my PIN numbers. But joking aside, it's the lack of sleep as well. Last night I had 3 hours sleep, and this is a regular occurrence. But the way I deal with it is you know, I feel very lucky because my sister has MS, and she's only 10 years older than me. She's blind in one eye, losing a sight in her other eye. And she's a real trooper. You know, she runs her own business. And I do think it's down to that, the way you approach things in life that can help it. Now, I'm very lucky in the fact that I don't suffer with the depression side of it. And I think that this is a real crux of it. So I'd like to ask really for more support for those depression elements of it. Because what I find is each day is a struggle, and I just sort of keep focused, keep busy. It's probably I'm living off my adrenaline, but when I get home on an evening, you collapse into bed, and then you realise what pain you were in when you stop blocking it out, really, and then you have that vicious circle of lack of sleep, and then and begin the cycle again. So the fibro-fog, the extreme tiredness, the extreme pain, trouble remembering things, that's probably the big thing for myself. I've also got a constituent, actually, and it can be trauma that brings this on. And I do think when I lost my dad, that made the situation worse, because you're right, stress can make it a lot more worse as well. But I had a constituent who lost 2 young babies with, I wound it now, 2 young babies with... through cancer, and her condition was brought on, and she's struggled since. But I'd just like to wrap up by saying it's already in the Equality Act, but it's on a case-by-case basis. I do think that's right, a case-by-case basis, because everybody's different. But what I would like to say is that we need to make sure it's more recognised, that there's greater support for their better medication, which doesn't zone you out, better support for depression. And also, it's not just about physio. Deep tissue massage is brilliant for those, and you can't get that on the NHS. So if we can, Minister, look at things like this, please. Thank you.
3-minute time limit now. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This condition, which I think we can all agree is not widely known about or understood, and those living with this condition often feel that they are drowning in despair, and their loved ones are very often at a loss as to how to best support them. Despite the fact, Mr. Chair, that up to 2 million people in the UK are believed to live with this condition. The true causes, of course, have not been established, but we do know that it's thought to be related to abnormal levels of certain chemicals in the brain and changes in the way that the central nervous system processes pain messages carried around the body. And it's also thought there may be a genetic predisposition. We know that in many cases the condition appears to be triggered by a physical or emotionally stressful event. And there's no cure, although there are some treatments which can ease its effects. And I want to pay tribute at this juncture to the very, very important self-help groups in North Ayrshire, my constituency, who help sufferers with this condition. There's no denying this condition is complex, and there's a genuine lack of societal recognition of it. It is truly disabling and must be treated and recognised as such by those seeking support from our welfare system. Consultations undertaken by the Scottish Government show that current PIT assessments are simply not fit for purpose for those with fluctuating conditions such as fibromyalgia. Where conditions have symptoms that fluctuate and vary, so must an effective assessment of illness be flexible to take account of that. The problem is that disability assessments in our current UK welfare system are tick box. So the answers need to be yes or no, even when complex, fluctuating and distressing conditions are being assessed. What condition can truly be assessed in such a way and still be meaningful? Clearly, ticking boxes in a simplistic way cannot capture the distress, the trauma and the debilitation of such a complex condition. And those living with this disease must simply subject themselves to this process in order to access essential support. We need a welfare system that fully understands and is fully cognisant of what those with this condition endure every single day as they struggle with everyday tasks that the rest of us take for granted. We need to ensure that the lives that they are living are reflected in the support they receive. That's the right thing to do. So I urge the Minister today to put these laudable aims in motion without any further delay, because any further delay means greater suffering for those affected and their families, which really ought to shame us all.
Matters.
The member for Chesterfield on securing this debate. First of all, I'd like to declare an interest. My wife is a fibromyalgia sufferer, and I want to talk about primarily her experience of the condition. Perhaps the hardest symptoms to understand are the ones that we can't see. The fatigue literally wipes her out for days at a time, but it's also the pain to the outside world. She looks okay, but underneath she's suffering. In her own words, she says, I do experience various aches and pains. These can differ from aching muscles to painful joints, especially knees and ankles. Tenderness all over my skin, like I'm covered in 1,000 small but painful bruises. And sometimes it feels as if every bone in my body is burning. Of course, I just want to give her a hug, but doing that makes her wince, and that's so frustrating knowing I can't help. However, my wife also considers the cognitive challenges, the brain fog, as she calls it, the most irritating symptom. She also says sleeping doesn't come easily. It's very difficult to get to sleep, and when I do fall asleep, I wake up in minutes. And perhaps there's not enough time to go through all the symptoms, but we've heard many of them today. The biggest thing I'd like the government to take away from today, though, is the experience we had in getting a diagnosis and then treatment. My wife says, when I was first diagnosed with fibromyalgia 3 years ago, I was actually quite relieved. I knew things were getting worse. Despite numerous tests, there seemed to be nothing wrong with me. I recall multiple visits to my doctors where I would tell them how exhausted I felt, and they told me I was probably depressed, that being a working mum with 3 kids was tiring and difficult. Hearing that actually just made her despair. She says sometimes just... Okay.
Thank you. On that point, my constituent James wrote to me a lot of the same, Matt, saying that a lot of medical professionals look at you as though it doesn't exist, the condition doesn't exist, and the worst part is nobody understands it, it's not recognised, and that he got zero support, suffers from physical depression, and that the antidepressants don't work, and he's not able to get the support that he needs from the NHS or the treatment.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. That's exactly the experience that we've had and so many other honourable members' constituents have had today. My wife says this is how she actually feels at the time. Before she got a diagnosis, she said, sometimes just having a bath would wear me out. I spent most weekends in bed or on the sofa. I just had no energy to move. I couldn't do stuff with my children or even cook dinner. And I couldn't understand why I felt like this. I knew other people got tired, but they still managed to live their lives. And so I thought I must just be lazy or completely lacking self-control. So when I was finally given my diagnosis, I was pleased that it wasn't just me making it all up. It was not all in my head or character flaws leading to laziness and ill discipline. I was, and I'm actually ill. This is something beyond my control, and although it might be unfortunate, at least I now knew what it was. And I was relieved as well, Mr. Bailey. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. On reflection, I think we both realised she'd probably had the condition for years, and all the time it was getting worse. We knew something was wrong, but we felt that nobody was listening.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I think what is most shocking about fibromyalgia is that it affects mostly women. In fact, it's 7 women to 1 man. And my constituent came to visit me on Sunday at a surgery, and she's just emailed me now to say that it took her, for a 5-minute meeting, it's taken her until today to recover. And would my honourable friend agree that this is something we really cannot, continue to ignore?
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I think that's something that I certainly recognise, because the way my wife now tries to live is by pacing herself. That's how the only way she can really manage her condition. She knows it's a lot worse in the winter than in summer, and it will flare up if she overexerts herself. She can save energy for specific occasions, for example, a conference or work or an evening out. But no matter how much she plans, it can catch her out. She'll be too exhausted or in too much pain to meet a deadline or a meeting. She ends up giving her apologies and feels though she's unreliable. We've practically given up trying to plan social things in advance. So it is incredibly frustrating. And unless more research can be done into this condition and more awareness raised within the medical profession and employers, fibromyalgia sufferers will continue to be disadvantaged by more than just their symptoms. For us, this is not just about how fibromyalgia is classified under the Equality Act, but in common with many recurring and fluctuating conditions, it is about how people with these conditions are treated and supported. There needs to be much more research into the condition alongside consistent treatment pathways with better training for medical professionals to recognise and then treat the symptoms. Services should be in place to support fibromyalgia sufferers to enable them to live their lives as fully as possible. It took my wife 2 years, at her insistence, to be referred to a pain management clinic, and a year on from that she's still actually be waiting to be seen. All the time she is suffering and her condition is deteriorating. I hate what this condition has done to my wife and to my family. It is so frustrating not being able to help her make the pain go away, not being able to help her find a way for her to live her life as she should, and it is so frustrating that there appears to be no hope on the horizon that things will get any better soon.
Jonathan Edwards.
And my wife also is a sufferer of fibromyalgia, and I did ask her whether she wanted me to make a speech publicly declaring her condition, but she was eager for me to do so, because I think one of the biggest feelings felt by fibromyalgia sufferers is this feeling of helplessness, and she was eager for me to make this contribution. She's recently been diagnosed, but she's been suffering from the symptoms for 5 years, and the trigger event was the birth of our second child, a very physical, traumatic experience, of course, giving birth. And she's suffered since that day. It's a terrible, lifelong condition once it catches hold of an individual. And the characteristic of the condition, of course, is chronic pain, as we heard from an actual sufferer earlier, which is constant. But the condition flares, and these flares can last for weeks. And the symptoms then, of course, are extremely severe. There is no reprieve. And associated, of course, with chronic pain always is chronic fatigue, because sufferers can't sleep. And then they find themselves in a vicious cycle. And the other main condition, of course, is hypervigilance and sensitivity to noise and sound. And my wife has gone from living, a very active lifestyle to actually living life now minute by minute, which, of course, has huge impact on your social life and our ability to enjoy a family life. It's life-changing. It's an extremely convoluted medical pathway. Obviously, there's a lack of awareness at primary care and also at secondary care. My wife's been fortunate to have been referred to the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases in Bath, but she's at the start of a very long waiting list, 5 years after being diagnosed. So obviously, there's a huge amount of work to do in Wales, where health has evolved, for us to improve pathways for people who suffer from this condition. The treatment until you reach specialist care, of course, is based on the painkiller continuum. Different painkillers, different strengths, and then also antidepressants, and different antidepressants. And these, of course, have their own very serious side effects. The major symptoms are fatigue, widespread pain, joint aches, migraine, carpal tunnel, drug resistance, swelling hands and feet, slurred speech, light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, memory loss, food intolerances, IBS, lower tolerances of physical activity, non-restorative sleep, confusion, anxiety, depression, hearing problems, mental issues, and chemical sensitivity. And I'd like to finish by saying, Mr. Bailey, I wanted to say far more about the actual processes of helping these people, but there's insufficient time. These are very, very sick people, and the health systems that we have within the British state at the moment and the social security system at the moment offers little support.
Vera Hoppace.
It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and congratulations for securing the debate. In fact, I'm here today because Julie Britton, my constituent from the Bath Fibro Group, came to see me a couple of weeks ago with her partner and described very movingly what it is. And I believe, and we have heard today from two members whose wives are suffering from the condition, it's the carers particularly as well, who we need to listen to, because they feel as helpless, if not even more, to see a loved one suffering, and suffer particularly also from this fact that it seems that a lot of people, because they do not understand what it is, then seem to suggest that it's a made-up thing, that people, suddenly something has changed in their family members, and they don't really understand why. And that helplessness is, I think, one of the most painful things that the sufferers themselves, but also the people who live with loved ones have to put up with. Now, we have already heard a number of points about what it is. We have in Bath it has also been mentioned, an excellent facility, the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Disease, previously known as the Royal Mineral Water Hospital. It's a very old hospital, locally known as the MIN. But again, because actually it is not a rheumatic condition, it is something that is far more complicated. We need to really find facilities where we directly address fibromyalgia as a disease, rather than sort of tiptoeing around what it is. And that is, I believe, the main difficulty. The pain that people with fibromyalgia feel is not directly caused by damage or injury to the area that hurts. Instead, as I understand it, the problem lies in how the brain and the nervous system processes pain from that area. So it is complicated. The fibromyalgia is recognized in the Equality Act as a disability and as an invisible illness. But again, because of that uncertainty, I believe the most important thing is that we in this place really push for more research, funding into research into the condition, because that lies at the bottom of really ending the uncertainty. And what I have seen in a couple of similar occasions, members might know that I am working on eating disorders, is that it is a sort of similar picture emerging that people don't quite understand it. It then leads into stigma. Our rules and regulations don't really fit with it. So at the bottom of it really is more funding into understanding what fibromyalgia is, so that we can really end the suffering, not just of the people who feel this incredibly debilitating pain, but also the loved ones who live with it as well. It affects not just the people who suffer, but also those who live with the loved ones. So please make sure that we get more funding into understanding it.
David Linden.
I'm afraid with 3 minutes I can't possibly do justice the many emails and constituents who wrote to me. But suffice it to say thank you to Lorraine Deakins, Ellie Woodburn, Caroline McGarvey, Geraldine Kennedy and Marie Christie, all of whom live in Glasgow East and are affected by fibromyalgia, and I deeply regret that such a pathetic time limit means I can't read out their testimony. I'm actually quite upset about that. I do want to just touch on a number of issues that were raised also by charities, one of which is around this issue of training and education, because there's clearly an inconsistency amongst GPs, and I think that there's a real need for GPs to come into alignment on this, because we cannot have what seems to be a postcode lottery for some of our constituents who, if they've got a sympathetic GP, then that makes all the difference. No, I won't, because of the time limit. The issue of work capability assessments is a major issue as well. I understand that guidance was worked up with one of the charities in Maximus. I'd be grateful if the Minister can clarify whether or not that guidance has been cascaded through the DWP for decision makers. On the issue of reasonable adjustments, I think that point has been covered well enough, but I do think that there is a role for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to play there, and I hope the Minister can have conversations with her colleagues. On the issue of alternative medicines, I think we would all accept that patients know their bodies best, and so it's very, very important that we respect the wishes of patients, and that's very much a message to the health practitioners. And then just finally, because I do want to show some courtesy from honourable friend from Strangford here, this issue of social media platforms, one of the major concerns that was raised with me is that social media platforms are hosting these groups where misinformation is being perpetuated, and also that there are groups where people are talking about suicide. I think there's a real responsibility for social media platforms to get a grip of this. But as I say, I'm very conscious that many people want to speak in this debate. Many people put in to speak had the courtesy to do that. And so on that basis, I will stop talking and allow other colleagues who were here at the beginning of the debate to contribute.
Luke Pollard.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Chesterfield, who has become a real hero for so many people with fibromyalgia, because he's given a voice to them. And ahead of this debate, I posted on Facebook saying, can you share your feelings and experiences with people in Plymouth, because there are many people with fibromyalgia suffering in Plymouth, and the weight of people who have got in touch has been extraordinary. And for those that follow this debate, there is a common view, and that is that they want to be believed, they want to be supported, and that the work of my honourable friend has done so much for that. So the suggestion that came from opposite about a fibromyalgia champion, I think, is a good one that I would win cross-party support. I think it's important to say that we need to say clearly that fibromyalgia is real, that the pain is real, and that people that suffer it should be believed. It shouldn't be controversial, but I'm afraid it is still today. The campaign to have it recognised as a disability, I think, is a good one and a really important one. For so many people, having that recognition would make such a difference to their lives. Sarah wrote to me to say, "The pain is chronic and never goes away. Physically, it started with the horrendous pain, constant viral infections, walking along, and suddenly my legs would give way and I would end up lying in the road, being unable to change gears in my car suddenly as I didn't have any feeling, and being unable to function due to feeling so fatigued and having zero energy." And that was so common for the people that got in touch, talking about how fibromyalgia rips out the ability to do things that many of us take for granted, and for many cases, not understanding why that is taking place, not being able to explain it to people with, clearly, and the delays in diagnosis contributes to that suffering. Mr. Bailey, I think fibromyalgia should be classified as a disability. It is a necessary step to deal with this horrendous stigma around this disease, as well as directing the support and attention that we need to give people with fibromyalgia the support they really deserve. The real-life stories I've heard from people in Plymouth were not just about diagnosis in the health system, but was also about how the DWP treated them, especially in their healthcare assessments. I think it is true to say that our assessment system does not adequately understand the real-life experiences for so many people with hidden illnesses, fibromyalgia and ME in particular, but many more besides, and it really needs to, because they're precisely the people that need to get the support from our welfare system that currently are not as well. I think one thing that we can do, and everyone in this House can do, is to tackle the stigma around fibromyalgia, just as we have done around ME and so many other hidden illnesses as well. And to do that, we need to talk about fibromyalgia, we need to give a platform for those people who suffer from it, and we need to recognise that actually we won't receive mass lobbies of Parliament, simply because coming to London, especially from Plymouth and farther away, takes a lot of energy and knocks people out for weeks afterwards. And so we need to recognise this is real and we need to do something about it.
Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Chesterfield and bringing it forward, and all those right honourable members who made contributions in very restricted time. This is probably worthy of a 3-hour debate without a doubt, and the numbers who are here would be an indication of that. My introduction to fibromyalgia comes through my position as a local representative, as a councillor, as a member of the Assembly, and now as the Member of Parliament for Strangford. All of those things have introduced me to the fibromyalgia through my constituents. I just want to just very quickly refer to them. They tell me about the sensation of being in pain, feeling ill, having her sight affected. One lady says energy that she experienced periodically was her day-to-day life, and quite clearly, Mr. Bailey, my heart went out to her. Not simply because she's a difficult life within days. She can't get out of bed or eat or even really drink, not simply because she is young as well, but I want her to have so much more out of life other than this daily battle to do the things that most of us do, such as showering or basic hygiene. These are things that she can't. The diagnosis of fibromyalgia will not automatically entitle her to the help she needs, and that's why this debate is so important. And there will be an hour battle she's to fight to have her illnesses and her needs recognised and accepted. And we all know what the issues are. I want to refer very quickly, Mr. Bailey, to the specific treatment for FMS, and the multidisciplinary approach, the physical rehabilitation, the access to hydrotherapy, psychological support, the behavioural therapy, the education sessions. And along with that, we have the European League Against Rheumatism's guidelines on the condition, and they refer to the incorporate and collaborate with a range of professionals, including pain specialists, psychologists, physiotherapists and occupational therapists. All of those things tell me how complex this is. There's a lot of different departments managing a lot of different facets. So it's little wonder, with respect to the department and to the Minister in particular, who I'm very fond of, and she knows that one person often feels abandoned and alone in the middle of all these people in the departments. It's for these people that we stand today. So what do we want? We want research and legislation. We need protection under the Disability Discrimination Act. And I conclude with this comment from a lady. I know a lady who's an absolute whirlwind when she's well. She could be in my office cheering everyone up with a winning smile and charming personality, and literally an hour later she is wiped out and can't move for days at a time. To expect this lady to be able to attend job centres weekly for an hour-long job interviews, etc., without understanding that she physically cannot do this, absolutely absurd, and yet she is not entitled to ESA and other helps. And to believe that she will by some miracle, be able to attend her PIP assessment on a certain day is a nonsense, and yet she faces losing PIP. She doesn't present herself to be assessed. It's for people like this and all those people who live a life of darkness and pain, who battle to live, or battle to be able to eat and turn their lights on. I think today this debate is very important for that purpose.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr Bailey. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Chesterfield not only for securing this debate, but on his efforts to ensure greater recognition, research and understanding of fibromyalgia throughout the mechanisms in this House. Now, I'm only sorry that we're having this debate here in Westminster Hall, where we have such a compressed amount of time, and because of the structures of this place, sadly, most people have only got less than 3 minutes to say what they want to say. So I'm going to try my best to say as much as I can in the limited time that I have. But many of my constituents who have written to me won't be given a fair hearing under this platform, and it's really unfortunate. I know Brexit's going on today. I know it's equally important in its own right, but this is equally important for my constituents, and it impacts on their lives, and I don't think we're doing them any justice in this limited platform that we have. But fibromyalgia, as we've heard, is a chronic condition with symptoms that can be constant and intermittent for years or even a lifetime. And as we have heard from right honourable and honourable members across this House, fibromyalgia can be difficult to diagnose. It has fluctuating nature of the conditions. The symptoms are often varied, and as we've heard from various members, it has a huge impact on loved ones, and the personal contributions of the honourable member for Carmarthen, Ellesmere Port and Neston, and the personal experience of the honourable member for Morley and Outwood, calling for the government to recognise the support for those, particularly those experiencing depression, is really important. Now, my honourable member for Ayrshire and Nairn rightly calls on this government to recognise this condition as a disability and to look at the way that the DWP system assesses this, because the tick box exercise is not flexible and it doesn't recognise the impact of this condition. Now, I share my honourable member for Glasgow East's frustration that this platform just does not do justice to this subject at all. And it's unfortunate that the structures of how speaking times and limited times have taken over this debate has meant that a lot of people haven't really got to say as much as I think they would like to. Now, from my point of view, many of those suffering with this condition continue to work. So many of my constituents who have contacted me are not people who are solely reliant on the social security or the welfare system of this government. They're people who continue to work and want to contribute. And there is nothing more soul-destroying than having a debilitating condition when all you want to do is go out there and provide for your family. Now, where from fibromyalgia people are unable to work, it is of course right that the social security system should help them. Now, for many people, the additional support that personal independence payment or other forms of support provides to them allows them to reduce their hours and manage their condition. Yet for many, when it comes to reassessing and reapplying for support, they find that that goes against them to be seen to be self-managing or trying to manage their condition under the current process is completely against their own experience of trying to manage their condition and maintain their work. And that's exactly what anyone would want to do, and any self-respecting person in this government should hopefully appreciate that these people are trying their best to uphold jobs as well as manage their condition, and it should not be held against them in the DWP system. Now, I want to take the limited time I have to give voice to my constituents. In Vivian's words, she said, "The problem is I look okay on the outside, I can string sentences together. I also make eye contact in social situations, but the process itself is so degrading. Stress, which makes my fibromyalgia worse, meaning that the pain for me, I can hardly move. I take as many painkillers as I can and diazepam to lower my pain to a point where I can move without looking sore. What makes me mad is the appeal board know how fibro affects people, yet still have these processes in place. Surely our system of benefits must shake up if this is how people with genuine illnesses are treated, and I hope that the Minister will take that on board. Because the reality is, for someone to sit there with a form and tick boxes and outline and fit people into a condition that says they can make eye contact, they can do their makeup, they can walk a distance, it's a degrading process, and I just don't think that that is something that we would want to go through ourselves. So why would we administrate a process that puts other people through that, especially when we have the ability to change it? And it's not that hard, I don't think, to make a process that fits the criteria of what that condition is alter it slightly, vary it, create the flexibility, but for God's sake, don't have a system that degrades people further when they're already, for many, at their lowest point. I do not believe the government is doing enough to support people who wish to return to work or self-manage their condition. Now, another of my constituents, Donna from Carluke, had recently made the decision to return to work on a part-time basis. She's had to adapt her illness, and after 2 years of treatment, has agreed to return to work. However, she only works mornings because she needs the afternoon to sleep, to manage her own condition, and to be able to look after her children in the evenings. She was claiming personal independence payment, which allowed her to work part-time and supplement her earnings. However, Donna is currently under the process of challenging her refusal to be granted personal independence payment because ultimately the process assessed her as someone that did not need that additional support because the tick box exercise does not recognise her condition. The cut in her support that she currently receives through persons working tax credit and a council tax reduction means her household budget is cut by £750 a month, which is more than she earns for working part-time, and yet she still wants to continue to work. She feels she would be better off not working, but despite that, she continues to maintain her part-time job and to manage her condition because she has 2 young boys and she wants to set an example to them, and that is nothing short of admirable that this woman has gone through years and years of trying to get this diagnosis, has gone through a lot of personal stress and truly personal trauma in many respects of her life, and yet continues to work and make a prime example for her sons. And I don't think anyone should be penalised for doing that. Now, William from Netherburn was forced to give up work because of the dramatic changes to his lifestyle. He has a myriad of conditions on top of fibromyalgia, but he is in constant pain, and he said he's going numb with acute problems from his memory. He's going numb and has acute problems from his memory, and yet is awarded the lowest rate of care when moving from disability living allowance to personal independence payment. I think this is a flaw in part of the process of transitioning people over from the legacy benefits, and it's something that could have been altered. There has been countless debates across this House, and obviously it's easy for the opposition on this side of the House to criticise the government, but we have given you an ample opportunity and many suggestions of how to simply review, change, adapt the system, and it cannot be that hard to adapt a system even slightly to just recognise that this is not a user-friendly system for anyone with a condition. Now, a close friend of mine, Emma Richmond, who I've known since I was 17 years old, I can only say she is probably one of the most lively, vivacious, bubbly people that you've ever met, but yet in the last few years, because of this condition, I've seen a huge change in her. And I wanted to give her words rather than my own. She said, at the age of 30, I'm using a cane and I find I'm losing my social life to pain. Every day I'm in pain and it's never let up. There are days where I can't get off the sofa due to pain and fatigue. It's a debilitating condition. It's a humiliating condition. And I get to the stage where I don't see why I'm here anymore. I fight to be normal every day and it's not like me giving up. But Emma, like anyone that I've spoken about today, has a full-time job. She works for HMRC of all companies, and they have or departments rather, and they have been an absolutely understanding employer, which begs the question, if a person who works for a government department can have that level of understanding and flexibility, then why can an individual in society who engages with other services and other departments not have the same flexibility and understanding? It seems highly hypocritical, but it shows it can be done. And I believe that it can be done. And I think the government only has to make minor modifications and changes to its system to deliver the best possible service it can. And I think, with respect to the Minister, I know she always wants to. So I would ask the Minister to discuss with her colleagues in DWP and look at the many ways in which the initial assessments can be made fairer for people with fibromyalgia and mental health issues to avoid them needing to go through this taxing, arduous appeals process. The fact is, if we have to have an appeals process which consistently overturns the decisions, there are clearly flaws in the process. Get to the root of the cause, please fix this process, and please make it fairer for my constituents and my friend, because I want to be able to ensure that they enjoy their lives as much as we all can. Thanks.
Marcia de Cordova.
My apologies, my stop clock has literally just died on me, so do help me with time and bear with me, because I won't have won't be able to see the clock to actually do the time for me. So can I firstly say, Mr Bailey, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to just congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Chesterfield, for bringing this debate to this House. I think we all would agree across this hall today that he has done an excellent job in raising this issue on behalf of his constituents and fibromyalgia sufferers across the UK. Today in his speech, my honourable friend made some powerful points, and he spoke of the desperate need actually for there to be more research, and stressing the point that actually, whilst this is a DWP debate here today, it certainly does cross over into health, and I'm sure that the Minister will be taking that forward and working with her colleagues in health on this issue also. He also spoke of the impact that fibromyalgia does have on people, and it actually does affect their everyday life. It affects all aspects of their life, and whilst we will centre on the issues around social security, there is the issues with work that many colleagues actually expressed here today. And obviously the huge challenges with accessing social security, though, should not go unnoticed, because many contributions here today raise that point, and I'm sure the Minister will address that when she actually responds today. Many honourable members also made some real valid contributions and also interventions, many of whom are no longer here, but the member for Sheffield Central made a good intervention, just highlighting the lack of understanding of fibromyalgia on day-to-day living, in particular around accessing social security. And obviously members are highlighting the challenges that fibromyalgia can have and the problems it brings with qualifying for the PIP assessments. I know that my honourable friend spoke about it being a fluctuating condition in that which it is. But I also want to agree with the member for Southend West by showing and congratulating my honourable friend, because he certainly is a champion for fibromyalgia, and he certainly brought it to my attention. And my honourable friend, the member for Hayes and Middleton, also shared cases in recognising the impact that it can have in the areas of work. But I also want to thank the honourable member for Morley and Outwood for sharing her personal experiences with it, particularly around the memory and what they call the fibro-fog and the fatigue. So I just commend you for being so open, but also for how you're just getting on with life, as many of us do who are living with a long-term disability like myself. But I want to now just congratulate members of my honourable friend's constituents, Adrian, but also just for the work that Fibromyalgia Action UK and Versus Arthritis are actually doing in raising awareness. Obviously, it was first recognised by the WHO back in the 1970s, but we know in the UK there are up to 2 million people that are affected by this condition, and as many as 1 in 20 people are suffering from the condition. And yet it remains a condition that is still unrecognised, underdiagnosed, and in many cases is totally invisible. And as we have heard, the symptoms are associated to fibromyalgia include widespread pain across the entire body. And in the words of one sufferer, it is a generalised pain that can be anything from shooting pain in the arms, hands, fingers, feet, toes, back and shoulders, and how they can also experience headaches. Or one other saying, sometimes it feels like I'm hitting a brick wall. I get irritated and easily am quick to get frustrated and angry. And the symptoms range from the increased sensitivity to the pain, the fatigue, and to the difficulties in sleeping. Obviously, the difficulties with the memory and concentration, at which sometimes known as fibro-fog, and many members mentioned that today. But for those with suffering with the fibromyalgia symptoms and the life-altering and the pain that they experience is very real. But to the rest of the world, the condition can sometimes seem invisible. And it remains invisible only amongst the general population as well. And we know that when it comes to diagnosis and with many healthcare professionals, it's extremely difficult to diagnose, and that then goes hand in hand as to why it is on a case-by-case basis that the Equality Act is recognising the condition itself. And obviously many people face the constant, backing of having to keep going back to get diagnosed and, visit after visit at your GP practice. And the fact that the condition has many different symptoms relating to different areas of the body makes it even more challenging for many sufferers. And there is also no specific diagnostic testing for fibromyalgia. Instead, there have been many accounts where people have to face different years when it comes to different referrals for MRIs and so forth. And even once when they are diagnosed, they are forced to wait months, if not years, to actually get treatment for that. So I think we can obviously clearly say there are issues when it comes to health. And many contributions from honourable members here today did speak of the urgent need for research. And we heard an honourable member, I'm not sure is here now, did actually mention the work that's taking place in Sweden and in the US, and calling on the Minister again to look at how we can commit to more research being done for fibromyalgia, because we know it is affecting so many. Obviously, we know that fibromyalgia is a condition that can face many difficulties from diagnosis, and in the response to the petition presented by my honourable friend, the member for Chesterfield, in April last year, the government pointed towards the NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research. But we also know that fibromyalgia does affect all aspects, and I will just turn to the impact it can have on employment. And the fact that, those that suffer with it, the issues that they face in actually being able to stay in work and obviously getting the right support whilst they are in work. We know that among disabled people that there are many, the disability employment gap has remained at 30% over the last year. But I will point to what I believe is one of the best employment support programmes, and that's the Access to Work scheme. And it's actually making sure, firstly, that those that are suffering with fibromyalgia are actually aware of the scheme, but also raising awareness amongst employers about the scheme, because this can act as a valuable resource and tool for both employers making those reasonable adjustments, but obviously for those that are suffering, many of whom want to stay in work, can stay in work. So I also just want to obviously continue to press the Minister on making sure that Access to Work is adequately funded so that there is more funding available to those suffering. But I will move on to social security, because today we heard many accounts from many members here today, because we know that it's not just employment, but social security is a huge problem, with just 3% of personal independence claimants that have fibromyalgia. A vast majority of those are women. And these assessments are carried out by private companies, and in some cases with insufficient knowledge of fibromyalgia and the impact it will have on day-to-day life, as it is well known for failing because it's one of those invisible conditions. But it's really important. We know that the current assessment process for not just personal independence payment, but for employment and support allowance, the framework is flawed. And we know that in PIP, that as it's a fluctuating condition, it isn't being picked up, and we know that the assessment framework is failing far too many, and we know that the challenges that will face in terms of accessing that vital additional payment to help contribute towards those extra costs of living with fibromyalgia is essential. And so, again, I want to call on the Minister. We have to listen to all of those testimonies in relation to how PIP is affecting people, and recognising that the assessment framework isn't now fit for purpose. And she has to commit to reviewing that. I will just finally talk a bit briefly about the Equality Act. And I, with my own disability, fall under the Equality Act, and there is no reason why fibromyalgia cannot be seen as a disability under the Equality Act. We know that it is done on a case-by-case basis, but it is fundamental that going forward, the Equality Act needs to begin to recognise the impact that fibromyalgia has on people's daily living. Thank you.
Yeah. Minister Newton.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Bailey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And I would like to start by paying tribute to Adrienne, who I believe is with us today, because it was through Adrienne's persistency and determination by using the mechanism of having a petition of Parliament that we're actually here today. And I think it's a really good example of how people all around our country can make sure that they have their voices heard in this place. So congratulations. But I also want to pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman for Chesterfield, because he picked up that opportunity. He has worked with his constituent, and I'm very pleased to say, like everybody else has, and my colleague from the member for Southend, that he is a champion. And it's great that he has championed this cause of raising awareness and making sure that all of our public services are doing everything that they can do to help people with fibromyalgia. Because we have heard today how absolutely debilitating this condition can be and how many people it is affecting. So it was a really good opportunity today to build on the work that has been done with the petition, to have this debate today. And I actually share the frustration that has been mentioned by so many people here, that we haven't got time to address all the points that have been raised, and we haven't had time to hear from the many people who have written to members across the House today, wanting their voices individually to be heard. So I extended this invitation before the meeting today to the member for Chesterfield, that if I would like him to bring his constituent into the department. What we're discussing today is across government. It affects the Government Equalities Office, who are the custodians of the Equality Act. A lot has been discussed about health services and what more we can do about health services and research. So I'll ensure that we have ministers from those departments, as well as myself, are responsible for the main disability benefits, to have a real round table and a summit, so we can properly work with the information that's been provided today, but also for those really great organisations that are undertaking research and standing up for those people with fibromyalgia. And I also want to pay tribute to my honourable friend from Morley and Outwood, and also wonderful husbands who've spoken today, the husbands of their wives who are clearly, suffering. And it is very brave for members of Parliament to stand up and talk so personally about situations that are having, such a detrimental impact on them. And also for the member for Morley and Outwood, as MPs, it's very difficult for us to admit any sort of weakness at all, because, we always live in fear that our constituents will think less of us for expressing any sort of condition or disability which might be perceived to be a weakness. But actually, it's vitally important that people with disabilities and health conditions are in this place, because anybody with a health condition or disability has such an important role to play in our society, and I'm absolutely determined to make sure that we have a society where we focus on what people can do and not what they can't do, and that they're supported to reach their full potential. So drawing on some of the points that I've been asked to raise, so let's look at the support in the health service. Clearly we've heard today that it's too intermittent. I know there are good examples. I've been told by my colleagues in the Department for Health where there are bespoke services for people with fibromyalgia. But we've heard from colleagues today that clearly this is too much of a postcode lottery and they aren't consistent services. And this properly stems from the fact, has been recognised today, it's a very difficult condition to diagnose. And of course, general practitioners, will want to make sure that they're ruling out the possibility of other conditions, because the way in which it manifests itself is unique to each person. Again, as we've heard so powerfully today, two people are the same. So the GPs, in the absence of a diagnostic tool at the moment, need to explore lots of different avenues before they can get to a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I will.
Thank the Minister for giving way. I think it's not just about the postcode lottery, but actually a lot of GPs don't really know about the condition, and we need to get more understanding out there. Certainly my wife saw a number of doctors before she got a diagnosis, and also the experience in terms of gaining specialist help in order to access the pain clinic, which she hopefully will have later on in the year. She had to be referred to a rheumatologist to get a diagnosis, then to refer back to the GP to refer her back on then to the clinic. I think that is a pretty inefficient way of doing things.
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very, very important point. But I think to help general practitioners, it's my understanding that the Royal College of GPs and Arthritis Research UK have developed an e-learning course on muscular skeletal care, including fibromyalgia. and it's free to all healthcare professionals and aims to improve core skills in diagnosing and managing any musculoskeletal condition, including fibromyalgia. And the medical guide on diagnosis and treatment has also been developed by Fibromyalgia Association UK. And I also understand that now it's a mandatory core component of all GPs as they go through training, that they have an applied knowledge test called AKT. Now, the AKT is a summative assessment of the knowledge base that underpins independent general practice in the UK within the context of the NHS, and the content guide for the Royal College of GPs, which serves to prepare trainees for this test, includes specific reference to knowledge required around fibromyalgia. So clearly there is an consistent attempt now to make sure that GPs going through training and coming into general practice have a much better understanding of diagnosing and treating fibromyalgia than we've seen hitherto.
Minister, for giving way. Fibromyalgia affects 1 in 20 women. It does seem bizarre to me that there are still so many GPs who do not know about it. Clearly, training for incoming GPs is very effective and needs to be very effective, but we still have an awful lot of GPs who possibly need retraining. This is not the only condition. Endometriosis, for instance, which affects 1 in 10 women. There are an awful lot of GPs who've never heard of endometriosis. Do we not think we ought to have a GP system in this country where GPs regularly get trained in additional diseases and conditions that people know about, which affect so many people?
Right, there are so many conditions which we're beginning to understand, and with more research and more information coming forward, and it is vitally important that there is continuous education for GPs, and I think from what I understand from the Department of Health, this is ongoing, and that there is free learning material for people for GPs, for people with fibromyalgia. I'm really tempted to give way to lots of colleagues, but of course the more I give way, the less time I will have to actually address the questions which have already been raised in this debate. So I have taken a number of interventions, but as the clock is against me, now I'm just going to press on and try and address as many of those issues as possible, bearing in mind that there will be a subsequent follow-up meeting, and as I always do, I will write to members if I haven't been able to address their particular concerns in the few minutes that I have remaining to me. So clearly, as my honourable friend from Southend invited me to do so, and we do have the long-term investment in the NHS, and plans have been recently communicated for significant extra investment over the next 10 years in the NHS, and a disproportionate amount of money going into primary care and community services. And I think from all of the contributions that we've heard today, because each person is affected in such different ways, that the pathway and the range of coordinated care that people need to receive is largely going to be coordinated in the community with their GP. So I think that this new investment does give us hope, but alongside that we need to make sure there is both education and training, but also improved pathways, because the one message I've heard very clearly today, and I know from my own constituency cases working with women affected by fibromyalgia, is that people are ping-ponged around the system between physical services, mental health services, and there isn't a joined-up pathway of care. And in so many other chronic conditions, the NHS has got so much better at having evidence-based pathways, so people understand once they have their diagnosis the pathway that they're on, and those people that are able to support them also know the support that's available to them. So I think there is much more that we clearly need to take away from this debate today and actually work on. And this, as many members have said, is about getting the ball rolling, making sure the voices are heard loud and clear, and that we work across government and across this House to really improve the quality of life of people with fibromyalgia. Now, turning to the benefit system, I just want to assure people that under the Equalities Act, fibromyalgia is recognised as a disability. That's really important for people to understand. It is recognised as a disability. We've heard today that no two people are affected in the same way, and it's really important that we have a person-centred approach to how we provide support. Now, whether that's encouraging employers to be more aware, of fibromyalgia and the reasonable adjustments that they need to make to enable people to stay at work, or whether that indeed is our benefit system and how it supports people. And in our benefit system, again, it is a person-centred approach. And I can absolutely reassure members here today that the healthcare professionals that are undertaking both the work capability assessments for ESA, which is the income replacement benefit for people who can't work, and also the assessment providers for PIP, personal independence payment, is for people who are both in work and out of work. It's a non-means tested benefit. All of them have had training in fibromyalgia. I mean, a lot of this has been done recently in the last year and in association with voluntary sector organisations who've been supporting them to do that. Now, members will know, because we're often in debates about improving PIP, I'm absolutely determined to make sure that we do make the improvements we've already committed to, so everybody has access to the support they deserve.
Toby Perkins to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. You're always worried when you get a debate whether you're going to fill all the time, and it's great that this is one of those debates that clearly we could have had twice as much time and still filled it all. With all those contributions, it's hard to pick any out, but I think it was particularly compelling what the Honourable Lady from Morley and Outwood said, and also, as the Minister said, the contributions from my honourable friend for Ellesmere Port and the gentleman from Carmarthen East and Dnefer about the impact on families was also powerful. We will take the Minister upon a generous offer. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the recognition of fibromyalgia as a disability. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.